We live in an era where the unfettered exercise of free speech, the liberty to articulate our thoughts and opinions without restraint, is widely revered as one of humanity's most cherished and fundamental achievements. Yet, amidst this fervent celebration of vocal freedom, a profound question emerges. Does this paramount value inherently transform rudeness into a virtue? While I unequivocally believe that individuals should possess the freedom to speak their minds, and that unpopular or controversial opinions ought not to be met with punitive measures, we must carefully examine a specific strain of rude behavior, the kind that cloaks itself in the guise of ethical principles or moral righteousness. After all, weren't these very ethical and moral frameworks initially conceived and cultivated to foster and enhance human social cohesion, to bind communities together rather than to fray their delicate threads? Music. This brings us to the profound insights of Mencius, a preeminent Chinese philosopher who, following Confucius himself, stands as the most influential figure in the development of Confucian thought. Mencius posited that while a robust set of moral rules provides invaluable guidance, true virtue transcends mere adherence. He believed that individuals must cultivate a profound sensitivity, an intuitive discernment, enabling them to evaluate and determine the most appropriate course of behavior within any given context. This situational awareness is absolutely critical because, more often than not, the very essence of ethics shifts and adapts depending on the specific circumstances. Consider, for instance, the virtue of honesty. I imagine most of you would readily agree that honesty is a commendable quality. But does this imply that one must, without exception, be honest in every single interaction? Let's explore a common scenario. Imagine you are engaged in a lively conversation with a woman who strikes you as genuinely fun and exciting. You find yourself hoping for the opportunity to see her again. Naturally, you take the initiative and ask for her phone number. Her reply, however, is swift and stark. "No, I'm sorry, but I think you're simply too ugly to date for my taste." You are utterly flabbergasted, left speechless by the sheer bluntness of her remark. "Too ugly to date for her taste?" You echo internally, perhaps even aloud. Recovering slightly, you challenge her, pointing out the undeniable rudeness of her response. To this, she retorts, "Well, at least I'm honest." And in a narrow, literal sense, she has a point. She is, without question, being honest about her personal opinion. If we were to assess the virtue of honesty purely pragmatically, isolated from all other considerations, this woman might indeed appear to be a virtuous person. However, we must ask, is it truly ethical to be so brutally honest in this particular situation? While her answer is undeniably honest, it is also deeply, unnecessarily hurtful. Furthermore, in the context I've just described, her specific declaration, "You're too ugly to date for my taste," is entirely superfluous and inappropriate. The profound sting and emotional damage inflicted by such a remark far outweigh any negligible virtue of honesty it might claim to embody. She could have easily opted for a gentler, yet equally clear, refusal. "No, I'm sorry, I'm not interested," or "No, I'm sorry, you're not my type." These alternative responses would have perfectly conveyed her disinterest in going on a date, fulfilling the immediate need of the situation. Crucially, these comments would also have been fitting because, firstly, they clearly communicate her lack of desire for a date, which is her right, and secondly, they achieve this without causing gratuitous pain. This vivid example underscores a vital lesson. The how of communication is, at the very least, as significant as the what. Now, let me be clear. I am certainly not advocating that we should strive to avoid offending anyone at all costs. Nor am I suggesting that honesty is inherently a negative trait. Indeed, there are specific circumstances where causing offense is not only permissible but entirely justifiable, especially when it serves a greater, benevolent cause. For instance, consider a scenario where a particular demographic group within a society exhibits excessive hypersensitivity, weaponizing their intolerance towards ridicule or unconventional opinions to silence dissenting voices and suppress open discourse. In such a case, I would argue that deliberately provoking or offending them can be a legitimate, even necessary tactic to assert and defend the fundamental principles of free speech. Conversely, we must distinguish this from the systematic and deliberate abuse of freedom of speech, employed with the sole, malicious intent of inflicting harm upon others. A stark example would be the act of calling a black person the N-word and then disingenuously claiming that one is merely exercising their freedom of speech, and thus acting morally. In my view, this constitutes a clear and egregious form of ethical rudeness. So, the essential question remains, are you genuinely being honest and principled? Or are you simply being a thoughtless or malicious individual disguised by a flimsy excuse? As Mencius wisely recognized, the answer is utterly dependent on the specific situation. Mencius further elaborated that governments bear a solemn obligation to foster an environment that helps its citizens cultivate this crucial sensitivity, the ability to discern what behavior is appropriate and what is not in any given context. He believed that possessing a truly moral character does not entail a blind, robotic adherence to a rigid set of ethical rules. While rules undeniably offer invaluable guidance and structure, true virtue blossoms when individuals can independently assess and decide what is appropriate and what is not, applying wisdom beyond mere rote memorization. Is honesty, then, always moral without exception? Can one ethically steal when driven by the pangs of extreme hunger? Can the noble principle of freedom of speech be distorted and abused? Is censorship, in certain instances, the correct and necessary course of action? Although I vehemently disagree with many of the pervasive forms of censorship we witness in contemporary society, I believe that a proportionate degree of censorship is not inherently detrimental. Should we not, for example, shield children from overtly graphic or disturbing cinematic content? Ought we not to protect adolescents from certain types of exploitative pornography, if not all? There is a crucial distinction between censorship enacted from a place of genuine moral concern and protection, and the punitive silencing of individuals merely for expressing their opinions, even if those opinions are deemed rude. Therefore, my conclusion is that ethical rudeness, the intentional use of offensive speech under the false pretense of morality, should be vigilantly avoided. However, the expression of opinions, even if rude, should never be censored or punished by the state simply for their content. So, is rudeness a virtue? It is undeniably situational. Abusing ethical rules to justify behavior that is clearly immoral is never virtuous. On the other hand, deliberately breaking conventional ethical rules, even in a manner perceived as rude, with the ultimate aim of achieving a genuinely moral outcome, can, in my considered opinion, indeed be a virtuous act.